And we get okay. So here we are at our last class, and this I think was really the impetus for the entire semester, which is how to talk to our children about Israel. And it deserves ongoing conversation. But part of the challenge that I think we can all appreciate is that one, the conversation is dynamic, so there is a lot of change. Meaning that if you're talking to your kids about the current government in Israel, well, that's a very particular conversation versus maybe talking about the history of Israel or the connection to Israel that one would have, after the Six-Day War, which was such an important and influential moment in the life of American Jews. And it really did shift the identity of American Jewry and its relationship with Israel. So that's a different conversation. So here's what I hope to accomplish today. And it's really interesting in the preparing the text. I don't know if you took a look at it. It all seems negative. Don't read it as a negative at all. It's only in the sort of construction of it, but it all has a very positive understanding. In other words, not positive in a constructive kind of approach to how to have conversations with your children and of course with anybody. And we're going to discuss that through a couple of articles, and then we'll take a little break and we'll play with Lori's test. And hopefully you all will pass just like she did, and then we'll wrap our class up. Okay. All right. So let me bring up the texts for today, and let's see if you all see this. Can you all see this? Yes. Good. All right. So I want to begin by just identifying the three things that I think are very important, very, very important when you're having this conversation, okay? Because these are common tactics that we employ when we are trying to persuade others to consider how they might frame their own conversations. All of these, as I identified in the introduction, are not negative in their they're not negative in their impact. They're actually quite positive and constructive. But it is very important to understand that without the opposite of these, which would be to say it's all perfect, it's a place for everybody, and it's a place of total justice and equity. And if we did that, we would actually be overlooking some realities which don't make Israel any better. And it's one of the challenges. We have a fear. We have a fear that if we don't talk about Israel as being the playground of everything that's perfect and good, or a place that is going to save Jews from all of the bad people in the world, or a place where this is the most democratic, the most just, the most equal, the most welcoming, which all those things are ostensibly true, but by establishing the conversation as if those are the preconditions to a conversation, it makes it very difficult to help someone understand the nuance. That is our key word today. If we were on Sesame Street and we said this is the word of the day, it would be nuance. Okay? And then there would be like two words coming into the screen: nuance, right? And then you would see a bunch of kids jumping around and saying nuance. And then you would look at these like graphics that would show people being like, it's difficult, it's complicated, right? I don't think that Sesame Street did how to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in any of their episodes, but I do think that if they did, the word of the day would be nuance. Okay, so let's start with something that I was so happy that I found this. It is something that we often completely overlook in this conversation, which is how do people who are trying to do what we're trying to do speak critically, but also authentically, and critically from a sense of like not negatively, but like thoughtfully about what happens in Israel and how a child who is trying to understand this can frame their understanding. So let's read a little bit of this. Lauren, you want to start with this? This is from a website called Babes About Town. I gave you the website, and at the end of the article, you'll see a lot of resources, and that's why I thought that this was helpful. Okay, go ahead.
How to talk to your children about Palestine. Educate yourself. This is especially important if you have older kids who might ask more in-depth questions. Don't wade into the discussion without an understanding of key facts and some basic history. You don't need a degree in Middle East politics, but it's useful to have some context. If your child probes you on something you're not sure about, be honest about what you don't know. Explain that you will do more research or invite your child to learn alongside you. Find out what they already know. What ideas have they picked up from the news, school, their peers? This might be stuff that is factually inaccurate or harmful, and that needs instant correction. But in these early stages, think of it as a fact-finding mission. Mostly, you want to learn about what they understand, how they think, and also how they feel about the situation. Raise a critical thinker. Try not to shut down curiosity or to spoon-feed your child easy answers. Encourage them to ask questions, to go beyond social media and news sound bites. It's essential to help your child develop critical thinking skills, especially when they come to complex issues. As I wrote about bringing up race, I believe critical thinking is part of being a kind, responsible, and anti-racist human.
Okay, stop right there. Thank you very much. Okay, so if the title of this essay or this article was not how to talk to your children about Palestine, you might have also thought that it was how to talk to your children about Israel. Or let's just be really clear. How do you talk to your children about difficult situations? And I want to credit my friend and colleague, my teacher. Her name is Lee Brockman, and she points out that, like, sometimes when you're managing conflict, it becomes crucial not to have the conversation as one against the other, but actually side by side with the problem out front. And this is what we just read. Educate yourself, find out what the facts are on the ground, and raising a critical thinker to say, what do the facts really mean, right? And you can only do that by being side by side. So if you're going to be talking to somebody, and you know what, with a variety of points of view, from extremely conservative points of view to extremely liberal points of view, and everything in between, this is actually a very helpful strategy. Go to being educated. Figure out, you get to talk about the stuff that you know about, and you can also feel very comfortable saying, I don't know enough about that, and I'm willing to listen to the facts that you're giving me, because I'm going to also be a participant in your truth, and I'm going to be a critical thinker with what you think or how you feel, and I'm going to be a very good listener with that. But also, I'm going to listen, because if you're telling me that I got something from, I'm going to be really provocative here, Fox Cable News. Now, Fox News and Fox Headline News is a lot different than Fox Cable News. But the Fox Cable News, and to some degree CNN, right? Certainly MSNBC, like on both sides of the spectrum, if you're getting your news from something that is biased in some way, and there is an entertainment factor that is involved in the information sharing, then you need to be very critical about that. Now, on both sides, there are very, very reasonable, well-founded points of opinion, okay? We might not like the New York Times, but there is facts in the New York Times. We might not like Haaretz, which is also a little bit more of a left-leaning, progressive newspaper in Israel, but it has a legitimacy to it. Jay and I really liked the Algemeiner. Algemeiner tends to be a right-leaning, center right-leaning news service, and I happen to find it to be, fairly balanced and reasonable in the way that it approaches news and information, but you have to listen carefully. But if you listen to somebody on the Jerusalem Post, well, sometimes the Jerusalem Post is a little bit biased, let alone all of the other things on the right and the left. When you're trying to talk with somebody about finding facts, It's so very important that you put the facts on the table and that you agree about what you're talking about. And when you're going to talk with your children and they come home and they're like, I can't believe that the Israeli army is going in with bulldozers and knocking down innocent people's homes and they're killing children. Why are they doing that? And you know what? There has to be some clarity about the facts that make that what it is. Because sometimes it is true. There are bulldozers. And there was a child that was innocently shot last week, or recently, yesterday, maybe, if you heard about this, right? And it's horrible. It's a horrible piece of the news, but you'll also hear, you have to hear that there's accountability that's taking place. So put the facts on the table. And then you're educated about what you know, and you're helping your child or maybe your friend be educated about what they know. And then you begin to think about it critically. Yes, Judy, unmute if you had something to say. Judy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say the side-by-side approach is great, but it only works when both or all parties are agreeable.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Right. And also, I mean, I think you're right. And I wouldn't put the, it's just be careful when we presume that we can't accomplish it. But the approach is let's try this way, because here's what I think is the outcome. I think you're absolutely right. Is that sometimes, first of all, if you sit side by side with somebody, they might feel threatened. Isn't that weird? Right? Like, I mean, physically, imagine the physical proximity of sitting next to somebody. It could be disarming or it could be threatening, right? Because sometimes people like that distance, right? So it doesn't have to necessarily be about like the physical proximity, but it does happen to be about the idea. So here's the key about this. If you cannot accomplish establishing facts with somebody who isn't willing to sit with you side by side, then you realize that the conversation can't go any further. And you know what? And maybe that's it. And you can even identify, you could say, look, we may have different facts. I would love for us to look at the facts together and we'll have a conversation about it. But I can't talk to you about it this way. So if you want us to talk about it, let's talk about it this way. Right? We'll address the problem together. I want to talk about the problem, right? So it's a very hard thing. By the way, I'm sure you all know this. If you've ever had children or spouses or workmates or any other human being that you've come into conflict with at some point along the way, this is actually really good conflict resolution. That's why I brought it up. She's a conflict resolution negotiator. All right, any other comments for the moment? Let's go a little further. Lori, you feel like reading? Okay, so by the way, this woman, Uju Asika, she's an African woman. She's from South Africa, and she wrote this book called Bringing Up Race. So if you're interested, you can learn it. So she has a little quotable about it, right? So she's actually trying, the reason that last statement was being an anti-racist human, part of her approach is sort of like trying to understand what is sort of bias theory. And I think that she's, trying to understand, like, how do you educate your child to recognize that there are differences and create a space to think critically about those differences. Okay, so go for it. This is the quote, Lori, and then read a few more things.
Empower kids with critical thinking skills, and you are giving them tools to come up with creative solutions for real life challenges. Plus, you are sowing the seeds for a kinder, braver individual by teaching them to resist narrow ideas, to consider other points of view, and to embrace the unknown.
Right? So this is like really important stuff when you're out there in the world to remember, because there's a lot of emotions, there's a lot of opinions. And if this conflict was easily resolvable, it would have already been resolved. So the fact that it is deeply entrenched, there are many layers of complexity to it, and it's very dangerous for us to resolve that. If only this thing would happen, then everything would be better. But really what it is to say, look, this is a part of our humanity and being human, and raising people who can think more critically, as she points out, are kinder, although I love your Yiddish reading of it, and braver and gentler human beings when there's conflict. So go ahead and continue.
Check your biases. Depending on your political, ethnic, or religious affiliations, you are likely to have strong views on this issue. That's a natural human response. But do be honest if you're talking to kids about why you might see things from a particular lens. As a Black African woman, I make no bones about being anti-colonialist. So I vehemently oppose the ongoing encroachment of Israeli settlers in the West Bank. I am appalled that the majority of Palestinians are still refugees or second-class citizens in their former homeland. Several human rights organizations describe it as apartheid. I grew up when apartheid was legal in South Africa. I remember the ANC and Nelson Mandela being called terrorists by Margaret Thatcher's government. But we know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians.
Okay, go ahead, read the next two paragraphs.
If I were an Israeli mom trying to shield my children from daily rocket attacks by Hamas, I might feel differently. The rise of radical Islam across the region is a very real and present worry. Arab and Muslim friends I speak to are upset that the injustice against Palestinians isn't properly covered by mainstream media. Jewish friends feel the coverage is one-sided and that they are being demonized on social media. When we talk to our children about Palestine and Israel, it's okay to be open about why we feel a certain way. However, try not to let your biases stop you from engaging in nuanced discussions. You are not aiming to indoctrinate your child. You are teaching them to care about something bigger than their daily life.
So I think that that's actually a really important piece, right? So we're listening, and I'm getting a little, itchy and agitated about certain, ways that are identified. I think that there was an attempt to relate, and it was also great. Like what she's saying is, look, I grew up in my frame of view is this. And so when I see these things, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, in her mind, she's like, it's a duck, right? So if it looks like apartheid, then it probably is apartheid. That's her frame, right? And so she's saying, I really want to oppose that. But what she was also saying is, look, the answer isn't to solve the problem. The answer is to raise critical thinkers, to diminish biases, and to get to the facts so that you can really have that conversation. That's the thing that we need to be focused on and pay attention to. And here's an article where, like, I might disagree with some of the facts that she's put on the piece of paper. Okay, fine. You know what? She's not writing for me. She's writing for people that have a different set of facts. But if I have a set of facts and somebody else has a set of facts, and we're trying to approach this together, we put our facts on the table. You know what? I can argue until we're blue in the face. We can argue about the facts, right? But more often than not, if we're sitting at the table and we put both of the facts on the table and we acknowledge the humanity of other people's facts, that's the chance that we actually have to create some deeper understanding. And I'm telling you, if you look at every human organization that brings Palestinians and Israelis together, I just saw it last night. Becky was watching some TV show about baking in Versailles. Did you guys see this? I don't know. It's my wife. She watched this show, and it was all about a Palestinian and an Israeli guy who are cooking food together in France, right? How's that happen? Who knows? But you know what? They've figured out how to work together. Okay, Jay.
Of course, she can have her, her facts and her opinions, but we certainly have a right to react to them. To me, this subheading, check your biases, is probably the most ironic thing I've read, in this class. It's quite biased. But the line that kills me here is that if I were an Israeli mom trying to shield my children from the daily rocket attacks by Hamas, I might feel differently. I could throw up reading that. I might feel differently.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my take.
It's such an interesting thing. I think that so I don't know if I would go to like the most ironic or the most like wretched piece, but I do agree that like this is the other side of the conversation, and that's what we're about to read next. Is how it's so important for us to be able to make space for other conversations, because there is an opportunity for us to write a better story together. There's and that's the key. So Jay, since you made that really nice comment, anybody else have a comment for the moment? It's a really good point. Why don't you read the next piece, which is don't have a single story. Okay?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Don't, by the way, before I read that, and I'm not gonna go into details about it, but because I don't want to waste everybody's time, but that second and the first page, the second, it's not the place to protect Jews from bad guys. I would have a discussion about that because I have other feelings about that, but
We're gonna get
okay. So I'm sorry, where are we in our?
don't get stuck on a single story.
Okay, this leads me to Chimamanda Adichie's excellent speech, "The Danger of a Single Story." When it comes to an issue this divisive, it's easy to get stuck on a singular narrative. Peaceful and democratic Israelis being attacked by, quote, terrorist and jihadist Palestinians. Evil Israelis trying to obliterate Palestinian victims. Actually, the villains and victims narrative is dehumanizing for everyone.
Very powerful statement, right? So
Yes.
like it's us and them, victims and aggressors, terrorists and all that. Like nobody should say that this is the story that we all need to have. Because look, and I don't think that it's denying the fact that there are victims and there are terrorists. It's just saying that that's not the story that we need to write. So let's go ahead and continue,
Okay.
right?
In our conversations, we are careful to distinguish between the aggression of a hardliner Israeli government or a militant Hamas versus the hopes, dreams, and concerns of ordinary Israeli and Palestinian citizens. Encourage your child to seek out multiple perspectives. Listen to real life stories told by the people who have everything at stake.
Very nice.
Frankly, there isn't anyone you couldn't learn to love once you've heard their story.
You guys know who Fred Rogers is, right? Yeah, right? Great movie. Unbelievable. Okay? So hear what she's doing, right? So just remember, like, first of all, she's positioning herself in such a way as she's saying, look, I have an opinion, right? And it might, it might be and I don't think she's denying biases. Actually, she says in the statement, she's like, for us to feel passionately about this is not, it's a natural part of our humanity. And look at her story. I grew up in Africa where there was apartheid. I grew up in a place that was considered a colonial, a colonial society. It was horrible. I have that as part of my historical DNA. But I am here in a place and I'm trying to figure out how to write a new story. And you know that you can't there isn't anyone you can't learn to love once you've heard their story. Meaning that if you can't sit down and hear their story and say, let's write a new story together, right? Because once you've met this person, once you've met your child in their 20s and they're trying to ask you like what it is that they see about this, there's an opportunity for you to write a story together. It comes with your own history and it also comes with the opportunity to teach them a new history. Roberta P., you want to read the next piece?
Sure. Stand by your values. Being able to consider multiple perspectives doesn't mean you abandon your personal values. This isn't about picking sides, it's about basic decency. I am a proud Nigerian Brit, and I'm often critical of both Nigerian and British governments. I'm also critical of human rights abuses in countries like America, Brazil, China, Myanmar, Iraq, Syria, and Colombia. Calling out injustice doesn't make us anti any of these countries, makes us pro humanity. When we talk to our children about Palestine, we must stand by our values. In our family, we are anti imperialist and oppose the occupation of Palestine and her people. We are anti racist and oppose the spread of anti Semitic narratives or the denial of Israel's right to exist. We believe everybody deserves to have a country they call home, where they feel free and safe. In an ideal world, this would include freedom and security for Palestinians and Israelis. The two-state solution is not as simple as it sounds, but it's something to aspire towards. Above all, we value peace and we look to those who share the same values.
So there's a little bit of concrete stuff that we need to talk about. I love that she's like, when we talk to our children about this, we have these values, right? We believe in this and we don't believe in that. We believe in this and we believe in that. Well, like you know, you have to demonstrate this, right? So that's going to be the second article. How do you demonstrate these things? You can't just talk about it. And I think that this is true of any sort of political position that you find in this country, or any sort of like opinion about the global, the experience of being in a global civilization. All of these things are, really critical, and being cognizant of them when you're talking with your children and other people will help you. So Roberta, go ahead and finish these last two pieces.
Look for the helpers. When things seem overwhelming, remember Mr. Rogers said, look for the helpers. Reassure your child that there are always people who want to help and that we can help too. Talk about ways to be helpful, i.e. sending donations, writing to an elected official, going on a march to raise awareness, listening and learning, or supporting friends who are directly affected. Talk about ways people have tried to help throughout history and follow present-day organizations committed to peace.
Okay. Last piece.
We are lifelong learners. That means we are always ready to unlearn and relearn. When we talk to our children about Palestine, we can also look for broader lessons. The historic struggle can teach us much about global systems of power and oppression, national identity, and religious persecution. East versus West, ancestral land disputes, and the search for sovereignty, the ongoing impact of foreign intervention and general trauma. And if we look closer, we can also find lessons of kindness, friendship, resilience, and hope.
Very nice. Okay, so by the way, the last of this, there's a little bit of conversation starters, very practical, and then there's a whole bunch of resources. So here's what I love, right? This is not someone who is like just exclusively drawing from Palestinian texts. So just look, Jewish Virtual Library, Jewish Voice of Peace, which we discussed is a little bit on the different perspective, right? But it's in there, right? So knowing that there's all of these different kinds of resources that are available to you for if you're interested is really helpful when you are looking for those resources. So what would you say is like, so what's the most important thing? Try to help me articulate. If you're going to talk with your children about Israel, if you've just had this wonderful class and you've been exposed to some history, you've been exposed to some, some of the sort of complexity and the nuances we've said before. You've got all of these things going for you. So now, what did this article do to help you understand what you should be prepared for when you are talking to your children about Israel? Anybody want to help kind of summarize it, reframe it a little bit? Lauren.
It is, and it always will be this amazing country. It's as small as a minute. Everybody wants a piece of it. Leaps and bounds ahead of everybody as far as inventions, science. They have the best food. It's historical, and yet everybody has an opinion about Israel. Everybody has an opinion about Israel. Everybody has something to say about Israel. And it's beautiful, the scenery, the history, and yet we just read, there's two sides to every story, so it's neither one or the other. I was going to mention, I read a book called The City of a Thousand Gates, and it's the first time I realized there are Arab mothers out there too, and not every Arab mother is part of a terrorist group, and she also has to send her children out into the world and hope they come back safely. And it opened my eyes to their plight and what they go through, and I think Hadassah might have had the author have a talk, and it's like she wrote it from, there's two sides to every story. It's not only the Israelis who are, being the Israeli children But it's like these Arab mothers who had this, perfectly normal life, and she has to send her child out and hope they come back alive and safe. So that's what I would say. And now I have to go, but it's been a fabulous class, Rabbi. We'll
All
see
right,
you
bye,
later. Happy
Lori.
holiday.
Bye, everybody. Happy holidays.
Bye.
Take care. All right, Jay, please.
I think Fred Rogers summed it up best. I think he really nailed it, that frankly, there isn't anyone you couldn't learn to love once you've heard their story.
Right.
As we get to know people, that's half the battle, just getting to know people and hearing them and,
Beautiful, right? Isn't
yeah,
that
he nailed it.
right? So, and like how, so, based on your, the comment that I think, we also have to be very sensitive to, our story, the Jewish story is dark. It is harrowing. We might be enjoying a time in history with unprecedented freedom and prosperity, and that's really wonderful. But our connection is very it is riddled with just catastrophe, and to know that that's a part of our story is something that is so important to sit down and speak to. And the woman, she was like, I mean, we in the last article where she's like, I might agree, right? She's like, well, it's maybe she also advocated to hear the story. So if she's willing, she's probably heard the story for her to be able to say that, right? And imagine what she was like before she heard that story. So she's already being able to say, you know what? My story could be learned and unlearned and relearned. Yeah. Very good point. Any other comments so far of summaries of what we should do? Yes, Jay, go ahead.
Speaking of the Jewish story that you just mentioned, I always hear in terms of the Jewish story that we've been facing prejudice for 2,000 or 2,500 years. Those are the numbers that are, but didn't we just celebrate our 57th, 5,700 year? So were we beloved before those 2,500 years?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, it's not like love and hate those are actually they're qualities that became focused in the enslavement of the Jews in Egypt, possibly. Right? Like that's where our story kind of begins, where a new king arose and did not know Joseph. And in that moment of meaning, there was a new king, just in this context, who did not know the story of Joseph and his family. And because he did not know their story, he was able to objectify them and dehumanize them and marginalize them and enslave them. Right? And that kind of thinking is something that has an eternal quality to it. We have not yet reached a place in our human development, our humanity, in which those qualities don't have the capacity to exist. But with this kind of like critical thinking and education and striving towards deeper understanding, we might have, there's hope. There's hope. That's an interesting thing. Yeah, I wouldn't say that like Jews have been hated forever, because that seems, who wants to play with the most hated team? I don't know. I loved the Los Angeles Raiders when they were the Raiders, and the Oakland Raiders, and I stopped watching when they were in Oakland because I was just sick and tired of the sort of, reviled and hatred, not because of they winning or loss. I just didn't want to be part of their like, forget you guys. We're gonna be, we're gonna be hated and love it. Like I just, I don't think that that's part of my identity, and it shouldn't be part of the Jewish identity either. All right. Any other comments? Let's read for a couple minutes the second piece. Okay. So this comes from the Times of Israel. I don't know if I talked to you about Times of Israel. Anybody subscribe to the Times of Israel? You know about it? Good. So Roberta, I saw your hand go up. It is a really great, also fairly balanced newspaper. I think it definitely is centrist. And so it will have moments of, it will acknowledge more extreme points of view, but it sort of, It also puts at arm length things, but on both sides. But it definitely does kind of recognize that those are voices that are part of the story. So this was just part of the blogs, and blogs get generally a variety of opinions. And here's one. He says 3 things we do wrong when we talk to our kids about Israel. Again, it sounds wrong. It sounds negative. It sounds like don't do this. But listen to what it is that it does say that we should do. Judy Solomon, do you want to read a little bit?
Parents can interact meaningfully and memorably by switching the language, changing the location, and frankly, talking less and doing more. In my 18 years in the Jewish communal world, I've been asked one question more than any other. After nearly any speech I make, regardless of the topic, a well-meaning Jewish parent or grandparent will come up to me to ask what Jewish organizations can do to help their children or grandchildren feel closer to Israel. For 18 years, I've given the same answer. There are many wonderful Jewish and pro-Israel organizations doing incredible things to connect young Jews in Israel. As good as many of their programs are, their chances of success go up exponentially if they're reinforcing lessons learned at home. Over the years, I've learned that many parents are trying to create this connection, but making crucial mistakes in doing so. It dawned on me that I was making a few of the same mistakes with my own kids. So let me offer publicly the 3 things we all do wrong when we talk to our kids about Israel.
Okay, great, good. So we got 3 things. Okay, 1. Go ahead, read us for 1.
Somebody else can go on.
Okay, great. Let's see. Roberta P, have you read yet?
Yes.
Oh, you did. Sorry.
Yeah.
Roberta S, please. Oh, are you there? Muted? Unmute, please. Roberta S, you need to unmute. Roberta. Roberta, is she there? Roberta.
Okay. First we talk, you got it? Okay, I just have trouble with the, okay, first we talked to them about Israel while in the US. It has never been easier for a young American Jew to go to Israel. Yet more than half of young adults ages 18 to 29 have never even been there once. The numbers from Pew Research Center surveys in recent years could not be clearer. In 2021, for instance, Pew found that while nearly 60% of US Jews personally feel an emotional attachment to Israel, attachment surges to nearly 80% for those who have been to Israel. Admittedly, there is some selection bias at play in the research, as the population of American Jews who have chosen to go to Israel likely overlaps with the population more likely to feel an attachment. Still, these numbers are simply too striking to be ignored.
Isn't that a great point, right? So like it's don't just read that it goes to 80% because they were predisposed to love Israel. It's that actually let's just imagine that you go with a sense of openness and that you don't know and you're hearing everything, but that the attachment surges 80%, and you could be attached to Israel and still be critical. That is such an important part of this. Okay, keep going.
Your kids need to go to Israel with you, making the family memories that will shape the adults they grow into. You need to touch the walls of the Kotel together, lean gently on each other as you watch the sunrise over Masada, walk the streets of Tel Aviv, ride a bus with Israelis, and get jostled in the Jerusalem market. And know that these ordinary and attainable experiences were the stuff of dreams for Jews just 100 years ago.
Right? Beautiful. Thank you. That's the Israel is perfect, right? But you're not going to know it until you be there. You're there, right? So go ahead.
Israel is not an easy or an inexpensive place to visit. Then again, neither are Disney World or Mexico. But we make sacrifices for the things that matter, and we choose to invest when the payoff is high. For those who cannot visit Israel, the Jewish Agency for Israel is committed to bringing Israel to you, with more than 300 Israeli emissaries working in Jewish communities and Jewish institutions, as well as on college campuses across the US. We are also proud to offer programs that make Israel travel as easy as possible, such as Masa Israeli Journey, which we jointly run with the government of Israel, and our partnership with Route One. Masa and Route One are leaders in providing immersive experiences in Israel for young adults and teenagers, respectively. I just
Great.
want to say something,
Yep.
Rabbi.
Yep.
For our 50th wedding anniversary, we took all of our kids and grandkids to Israel.
Whoa.
And half of them, one family, is not being raised Jewish. So it was really important for me to get them there so they could see at least a part of what is our history.
And what's the outcome?
Well, the outcome is that they do. They remember that trip as the best trip they've ever had. And they, the memories are wonderful. And they felt they really got a nice idea of what Israel was like. A little amusement is that, my granddaughter, who in South Carolina is not being raised Jewish, it was her boyfriend's brother who died, and she was talking to his parents, and they're not Jewish, of course, and they know that she's half Jewish, so they asked her, what does Hanukkah mean? And God only knows what she said.
All right. Well, that's an interesting piece, right? So
Candles and presents, I don't think that went beyond that.
isn't it? So here's the interesting
So
thing.
what can I do?
Thank you for bringing that up, right? So there's another part of this, right? Which is that, and I think that this, look, as a rabbi, this is such an important dilemma that we face, and it's been my dilemma, is that I can get up on a pulpit and I can speak for 20 minutes, and I can do it in a decent and somewhat entertaining manner, right? But the impact of that is not like, I'm waiting to write this book. This is the book, right? It's the so now what? So you have this great conversation, you're like, oh my God, this is the most important thing, charge it. And then the most part, people are like nodding their head and they're going, that was great, and I'm going on with my life, right? And you're like, what is it gonna take for you to take an interest in this? And then you have the other dilemma, which is, in order for you to take an interest, I'm gonna just have to talk and demonstrate. And look, you took your whole family to Israel. You took your whole family to Israel, and even this article, which is saying you can't have the conversation unless you're there, right? You can't really, talk about it unless you know what it is that you're talking about, which is a completely reasonable statement to make. But even still, there's no guarantee. And I think so nothing critical about your niece or granddaughter, nothing.
Granddaughter.
Yeah, and nothing about you. Like, it's
just life.
All it is about, there's another element of this, which is reinforcement. And it's all about your integrity. That's what you're taking away from this as learners, right? It's like the knock knock joke. The good knock knock, who's there? Control freak. Now you say control freak who, right? Like, there's a little bit of danger with like trying to change people by what you tell them what to do. And some people can have a very difficult time being able to sort of ascertain that. But if you're a person of integrity and you're willing to like structure your conversations from the facts on the table, and you're willing to demonstrate so people could see what you see, that's all you can do. That's all you can do, pretty much about anything in life, okay? Any other comments, or are you ready to go? All right, let's go. Barbara, you want to read?
Sure. Second, we talk to the younger generation about Israel in English. According to a 2021 American Jewish Committee survey, only 22% of American Jews report even minimal fluency with the Hebrew language. Remove Israeli Americans and Orthodox Jews from the survey, and that figure plummets. Can Jews who do not speak Hebrew love Israel? They can and do. Does speaking Hebrew mean that you will agree with Israel on everything it does? That does not appear to be the case for the Israelis themselves. But knowing even a little Hebrew makes a huge difference. It may be possible to love Shakespeare without understanding English, but his prose is simply less magical in translation. Similarly, Israel's magic is dulled and understanding of Israel stunted without Hebrew. I am not a fluent Hebrew speaker. Languages do not come easily to me. Yet when I came to the Jewish Agency, I decided that was important to learn Hebrew. What I did not expect was how much I would enjoy speaking Hebrew with my daughter and how much she would tolerate speaking it with me.
Wow.
My daughter will not read this op-ed, nor will she voluntarily come listen to me speak about Israel, but she will spend a few minutes speaking back and forth in Hebrew to me at the dinner table. You do not need to take Hebrew lessons with your children. Rather, learn Hebrew expressions together and listen to new Israeli music. Spend 5 minutes a day together on Duolingo. Watch Fauda and Shtisel in the original with subtitles and be surprised when you understand a sentence or two. These little acts will make your child feel closer to Israel than any reading you might assign them or Israel advocacy speakers you might go hear.
Very nice.
Finally, oh,
No, you're okay? You want to read?
no, I just was going to write, finally, we err by targeting, showing them how to.
That's the third one. Yeah.
No, I'll stop.
All
I
right.
just want to say that my late husband, Paul, and I took our kids to Israel when they were like, I want to say 19 and 22. And we went on a tour. We did the whole bus tour and seeing all the cities. And I had never been before. Paul had never been before. Vanessa was the only one that had gone on a USY summer experience. And the only was in Bedden. I think there was some war at the time when he was like eligible for that. So that's one of the reasons that we did this. And I had no idea what Israel was about until you go. And as a Jewish adult, I do think that it was like almost shameful that I was so old when I finally went. So it was just such an amazing experience.
Yeah.
It really did. I would say it changed my life.
So fantastic, and I thank you for saying that, and I do agree, right? I think that like when you go through and you hear, especially for Jewish people, and I've heard, I've heard from people who like my grandparents. I think my grandparents went to Israel, and my dad didn't go to Israel until I brought him there. My mom has not yet been to Israel. My brother's never been to Israel, right? And they're like, they're the fullness of their life. And like, how can you say, that you need to go to this place? And there was something very significant about that particular generation not going there. Birthright tried to solve the problem and saying, we're going to get as many of this generation to Israel as we possibly can. And it's been a good thing, right? But the idea of it forming identity is more than just going for the first time, right? You have this second piece, which I wanted to just pause before we go through. What do you think about the Hebrew piece? Is he right? Like what's the point? What's the point? So Judy, you're shaking your head and you're like, no, you don't agree.
Well, can I just say that I tried to learn Hebrew as an adult. This was something I tackled, oh gosh, maybe 20 years ago. I took Hebrew 1 3 different times. That's how bad I was with Hebrew. I mean, it was pitiful. It was so hard for me. And I'm a really visual person. So I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. And I'm pretty auditory because I deal with music all the time. And yet I struggled so much. And I finally mastered it to the point where I can follow along in a prayer book, which was my goal. That was my goal. It wasn't to speak, but it was to like, if you open a prayer book, can you find where you are in the service? And I can do that. And that to me was like, big accomplishment. But when I went there, nothing is in prayer book Hebrew. It's all in script. So now it was a whole other alphabet. And I was like, I'm not doing this all over again. It was exhausting. So I could hear the people speaking. And Ben, my son, had gone to Hebrew High for 5 years, and he knew enough to ask questions. And so he would saunter up and ask them, like, how much is something? And then they would think he was Israeli because he's dark skin with hair, and they would speak to him in Hebrew, and he'd look at me, I don't understand what they're saying.
That's
So,
good point.
so
Right, there's more. It's not just simply learn the language. There's something deeper going on here.
it's a lot harder. And
Yeah.
so I say you can love it without knowing the language.
Right. I think that he's not talking about, it's not necessarily communication fluency, but there's a fluency that comes with Hebrew that I think he's trying to identify. Judy, what do you want to say about that?
Well, my bias is that I don't speak the language and I still completely loved it. But I think whenever you do know a language, it makes the experience richer. So I agree.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he's trying to say here is that, like, so if you're going to talk, and I would just push even further. I think we ought to be teaching a lot more Arabic. Okay, because this is, if you sort of like do the global population, it's just like Chinese, right? If the more access we have to the cultural experiences that are defined by the languages that we use to describe them, the more familiar you are with that, the more that you can do that story connection, right? Like, how many times have you heard somebody tell you it's always better in Yiddish? The point that they're making in that moment is not that you need to be a Yiddish speaker, but they're saying there's a certain expressiveness, there's a certain connection, there's a certain identity that is formed that Yiddish tries to capture that makes that feeling powerful. Now you might say, like, oh, I don't need Yiddish. Well, the only thing I would say is that in New York, there was at a point like a precipitous increase in people naming their dogs after Yiddish names. You guys know this, right?
No.
So like, you're like, Yiddish is dead, and then like you walk in Central Park and they're like, Shane Madel, right? Like, put him, right? Like all of these things, and they weren't Jewish because there was a cultural connection that was going. And just in that example, what would have been the most cultural connection? It's not about obedience between master and servant. It's love language. It's love language. So if you want to understand the love language that binds the Jewish people and the Palestinian people together, which there is that love language, you need to understand Arabic and you need to understand Hebrew. You don't have to be a Hebrew speaker, because, by the way, last point about this. If you go to Tel Aviv today, the most frequent language that you're going to hear on the street is either Hebrew or English.
Yeah.
And the reason that it's either or with a question mark of which one's more than the other is because there are so many immigrants from so many different places in the world who do not speak Hebrew and and nobody speaks Romanian or Croatian or whatever, language that they came from, Taiwanese or anything like that, is it Tagalog? No. What's Vietnamese? I forgot what it's called. Right? Like any of those languages, which are very common to those people, cultural people, they're going to use English. They're going to use Hebrew. Okay. I saw a couple other hands. Yes, Judy.
Plus, I think most countries, not France, really appreciate it when you try to speak their language, even if you screw it up.
Right.
It's fun. It's fun to be able to connect that way.
Lori, maybe you could tell us. I actually think France. I'm fairly competent in Spanish, and so when I was in France, I was using like a little bit of my Spanish, and at the very least, because I was trying, there was a tremendous appreciation for it. But you're absolutely right. The Franks are very particular about their use of their language. Call it national pride or something else like that. I don't know. All right, let's yes, Sassy.
my husband and I both grew up in homes where our parents, when they didn't want us to understand something, would talk Yiddish. And both of us learned Yiddish by listening to them. And we loved the language. And we would talk to our kids occasionally with it. My son adores it.
Yeah.
And he's brought the love of this language to his family.
Right.
So
Very good point. And so what's the takeaway there? I hear it. You had a love for the language. It's expressing something. Your kids love it because it means that they're getting a connection, right? You grew up in a house where they didn't want to hear. Well, you know what? You probably wanted to hear because you want to hear. One, you probably didn't want to get in trouble. Two, you wanted to, like, find out the secrets. Three, it's love language.
it is, it's beautiful.
It's language of connection, whether it's Yiddish or so you want to love your neighbor, you want to love Israel, you want to know how to talk about Israel, right? Make sure that the language is there. Let's read the third one, and then we'll take a quick break. Okay. All right. Finally, so let's see. Anybody want to read who hasn't read today? Sherry, you haven't read for a while. You want to read? Great. Unmute yourself.
Finally, we err by talking to our kids about loving Israel instead of showing them how to love Israel. Teenagers these days have more access to information and in real time than any preceding generation. Yet actions speak far louder than words. No matter how many times you tell them that Israel is important, it will not match showing them that Israel is important to you. Fortunately, there are many steps you can take. Find volunteer opportunities at your local Jewish federation. Just to name a few, donate to an Israeli charity that aligns with your shared passions. Read a book about Israel, fiction or nonfiction, together and talk about it. Speak to your child about their interests and find a way to connect them to Israel, and then plan a related activity you can do together. The poet Maya Angelou once wrote, "At the end of the day, people won't remember what you said or did. They will remember how you made them feel." Israel is a vibrant and dynamic country, and if you just explore a little, you will find a way for it to enrich your life and the lives of your children. None of this is easy, but doing something worthwhile rarely is. We are prepared to make sacrifices for the education and happiness of our children. We recognize those causes as worthy of investment and effort. Will we make similar sacrifices for their identity? Dan Elbaum is head of North America at the Jewish Agency for Israel and the president and CEO of Jewish Agency International Development.
Right. So basically, he leaves the article. Thank you for reading it. Will we make similar sacrifices for their identity? Right. We understand that we're supporting causes for Israel. So are we going to make those kinds of, commitments to our children? I think it's such a provocative question. I think it's an incredibly important question, especially for this generation, because our generation is very much influenced by our parents or grandparents, right? People who built all of these kind of like supportive organizations. So they were already committed to it because there was a reason, right? And then you're like, I feel a connection. I feel responsible for carrying them forward. But now your children, your grandchildren, right? They need to understand what is being asked of them. And you cannot establish that when it comes to Israel without being there. You can't do it being there physically, being there in the language and the cultural connections, and I think in the last place, being there by like reinforcing things that happen here that they can have some kind of connective tissue that glues between the times that they go there, whether it's newspapers or books or articles or volunteering or anything like that. Sherry.
I have a question. Can you spend just a couple minutes talk about what's going on there now with the all these new people?
Sure. To the extent that I'll share a moment, but let's do this. And before let's take a break. But before we take a break, any other comments on the article right now? Okay, good. So let's take a break. Let's take 5 minutes. We'll come a little bit, talk about that, and we'll wrap up our class. Okay. So I thought for our final moments that we'd have a little fun. Let's test a little bit of our Hebrew knowledge, and then we'll just do that for a few minutes, and then we'll do like a little final summary of the class. Okay. So so thanks to Lori for doing this. Lori, do you want to preface any of this with what you've got here? Because this was great. At the beginning of the class, we were just talking about all the knowledge that we needed to have to sort of talk about Zionism and all that, and she had this from her Hebrew High days.
And I think I had mentioned during our time together, and I don't know if it was this class or others, I participated in a year abroad. There were 10 Americans who went. It was done through ORT and through, what was the other? It was through ORT. And the World Zionist Organization that selected us. We had to learn Hebrew fluently. We were sent to Ulpan for a month, and we were just thrown in to our program 6 days a week of learning. And at the end of the year, they gave us this particular test to see what our knowledge was.
Hold on. Bye, Alice. I know you're going. Take care.
Bye,
Mwah,
Alice.
mwah, mwah, mwah. Happy, happy, happy. Okay.
To test our knowledge. How many questions were there, Josh? 75?
150.
150 questions.
And we're going to go through each of them right now. Look at all right, so let's have fun. All right, because this is interesting stuff. So, all right, so this is.
And thank goodness it was in English. It was a little bit easier.
All right, so these are the first 9 questions. All right. The only Arab state bordering Israel which did not participate in war against Israel in 1967 was Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, or Jordan. Who wants the answer? It's Lebanon. I guess that was really great. Did you know that? Did you know that before looking at it? I did not. I thought they all hate us. Hashachar in the USA is 1, the name of a Jewish book club. 2, Senior Youth Movement sponsored by Hadassah Organization. No. Junior group of the Lubavitcher. Interesting. Or a Hebrew monthly magazine. Didn't know that, right? I don't think it still exists. The phrase Edot HaMizrach refers to Jews from Eastern Europe, South America, Asia, and Africa, or the Eastern United States. That's pretty funny. And Chaim Weizmann and Nachum Sokolov were instrumental in obtaining recognition of Zionist aspirations in the English document called the Balfour Declaration. Do you guys remember that from our test? What year did Balfour Declaration get written?
2019.
Linda!
One that I'm
1919?
Yeah.
You're very close. 1917. But that's really good. Very close. Okay? All right. According to tradition, who first uttered the phrase, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its cunning"? The members of Bilu, which is a partisan, a little bit of a early sort of pre-Israeli military organization. The Youth Aliyah, which was this wonderful, cultural movement to settle the land and go and move into kibbutzim. The Judean exiles in Babylonia, and refugees from the concentration camps. So clearly she got this one right. The Judean exiles in Babylonia, because it's from the books of Psalms. From the book of Psalms. It's Psalm 137. Okay. The author of Israel's national anthem, Hatikva, was Leonard Bernstein. Very good, because he also, wrote Porgy and Bess, right? Was that him? Right? Chaim Nachman Bialik, Naftali Hertzimber, and Yafa Yarkoni. Yafa Yarkoni was a popular Israeli singer. Lori, is this coming back to you? Yep. The plan to create the Jewish National Fund was presented to the Zionist Congress in 1901 by A. Nachum Sokolov, B. Menachem Ushishkin, C. Herman Shapira, and B. Max Nordau. And look, you circled it twice. So which was the answer? Was it Shapira or Nordau?
Nordau.
It was Nordau. I'm pretty sure it's Nordau. Okay. Very good. Although Herman Shapiro is great. And by the way, if you go in Israel, one of the great things about Israel, right, is that you drive on the streets and these are the names of all the streets, right? Like we live in areas of Avenida Bonita and we name Playa de Rama and all that other stuff, right? And there it's like you're driving on Ben Gurion and you turn right on Nachum Sokolov, okay? By the way, I live near Sokolov Street, but my street was Jabotinsky. I lived on Jabotinsky when I was living there for a year, and Sokolov was around the corner. So we used to like tell stories about these guys if they knew each other, right? And that if they knew that the streets were the same ones, that's great. By the way, I got to just, so I worked at Valley Bechelon for many times, and this is now my history. I worked at, right? So it's on Densmore Avenue. Okay, and there is a street, Morrison, and at the corner of Morrison and Densmore is our homes. But does anybody know the special names of Morrison and Densmore and why they would be intersected in real life? Let me see. Who? Judy, was it?
The Doors.
The Doors. That's right, Jim Morrison and John. I think so. You say it would be untrue.
Whoa.
That I would be a liar. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on. All right, so we'll do a couple more of these. All right. Let's see. The oldest Jewish agricultural school in Israel, founded by the Alliance of Israelite Universities. I would have never known of this, by the way. So this is like meaningless information, but it's really fun to know, right? Mikveh Yisrael. Okay. Very good. And Israel's independence was proclaimed by Golda Meir, Chaim Weizmann, Abba Iman, or David Ben Gurion. Okay, great. I appreciate your hesitation because Chaim Weizmann was the first president and David Ben Gurion was the first prime minister. Okay.
I can answer one question and I've already done it.
All right. So let's just pick one more and we'll have fun and then we'll stop. Okay. All right. Now we're really into it. Question number 95. Golah, or the diaspora, means this was 150 questions. Was this like an exam, Lori, that you had to take, or else you wouldn't have passed?
I think Ort wanted to know if they should send more Americans.
Oh my God, this is intense. All right, Golah, diaspora means territories captured during the 6 Day War, the partition of Jerusalem, dispersion of Jews all over the world, and countries west of Eilat, which is pretty funny, but no. The first Beit HaMikdash, the temple in Jerusalem, was built by King David or King Solomon. This one
Solomon.
It's Solomon, right? David gets the thing. He's like, you're gonna get Jerusalem, but you don't get to build the temple there. But and actually there's a city of David that's just outside of the temple palace, and he got to build that, and it was pretty darn nice, and they've uncovered a lot. Sfat is important historically because the Talmud was written there. It has hot springs. It was an important seaport. It was a medieval center of mysticism and Kabbalah. So Lori, how would you answer the question today? Because you put 2.
I would go with number 4 now.
That's good. Very good.
That's good.
Anybody listen to Wait, Don't Tell Me?
Yes.
Right? It's such a wonderful show. It's so great, right? First of all, it's a great place to get news. It's not bad news source, but also it's just really great because they play with some really ridiculous things like their questions. Like this one. It was an important seaport. Do you guys know that Sfat is in the middle of the country? It is landlocked. It has a view of a sea. No. University in Israel, founded by religious Jews, was Tel Aviv, Hebrew, Bar Ilan, or Haifa University. Haifa University. I'm kind of interested by that because Bar Ilan is in the south, and it's actually the resource where like the most comprehensive library of Jewish scholarship was created and is housed. It's really interesting. Jerusalem sage who received permission from the Roman general to build a house in Yavne was Rabban Gamliel, Hillel, Shammai, or Yochanan ben Zakkai. I gotta say, I think, unfortunately, the answer, Lori, is Yochanan ben Zakkai. And even though you got it right.
I don't know that I got it right.
Yeah, it's Yochanan ben Zakkai. He's the guy who says, give me He says, give me Yavne and its sages. And the Roman general says, okay, and then he destroys the city, okay? Exodus 47 was important because it was an Israeli gunboat. It was marked the exodus of Jews from Egypt, which is really funny. It was the boat which brought 4,500 Jewish survivors from Europe to the land of Israel. Okay, Jay, this is why your part of the story is so darn important. And don't ever mistake that it was being a safe land for the Jews. This story is exactly it. Because if that exodus didn't go, those Jews were going nowhere. They were going nowhere, even after the Holocaust. Okay, nowhere. That was the story. The 3 pilgrimage holidays during which the Jews went up to Jerusalem to celebrate here were Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. The Israeli radio station is Kol Yisrael. And to what place were the Jewish illegal immigrants exiled during the years of 1946?
Cyprus.
Cyprus, right? Now a very popular vacation spot and a place where Israelis who don't want to get married by the Rabbanut go to get married so they can be civilly married and come back and be married because they just don't want an Orthodox marriage.
Right.
So, concluding our wonderful survey, and congratulations, Lori. I think you got an A in that, and you got an A in this class. You all got A's in this class, by the way. I just want you to feel the sense of pride of your learning and accomplishment. And just to sort of like wrap it up and conclude, okay? Do you feel more well-informed after this class? Yes.
Yes.
Do you feel prepared that, when you confront your friends that you can actually expand your understanding a little bit, right?
A little bit.
Good, a little bit, right? Like, this was not, I think to get to the level where you would need to become an expert, right, would require that you enroll in a university and you take a course in which there would be examinations and all kinds of other stuff. And even then, you would still be stuck with this same word that we're all stuck with: nuanced. Nuanced. I think that was Sesame Street. It might have been Electric Company. Yeah. Do you guys remember that? Did you make your kids watch that when they were growing up? I was raised on that stuff. Anything else? Yep. Any other takeaways from our class? So we're reaching a conclusion.
Still don't have any answers. But
What would you like the answers to be, though?
to know what a solution is, but
No. That you just said the same thing. What would be the solution? And I mean, I'm serious. Take it for a moment. What the feeling that you have of wanting a solution is uncomfortable, right? But hopefully what you've been equipped with and learning is some knowledge, some context, some perspective, some depth and artistic, some fun and some levity, but also some like affirmation that the uncertainty is not felt alone.
right. It's like trying to come up with a solution to homelessness.
Alone. And if you feel alone, you will feel overwhelmed, right? This is a great Rabbi Tarfon teaching. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, velo ata ben chorin libatel mimena. It's not upon you. You're not the only one to fix the problem, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. Jeannie.
I think the whole idea that there has to be compromise, and everyone may walk away feeling like they've lost some and they've gained some from this, but that in the end, it'll have to be compromise. And I always knew it wasn't simple. I always knew it was complicated. It's like, again, like homelessness. Anyone who tells you they've got the answer is multiple answers because it's multiple issues. And so, but I actually think I feel a little more hopeful after this class, which is something, hope at this point is really important. But yeah, I feel like with those things in mind, and knowing that no one's going to get everything they want, but it can still be okay the way it is. I think that's given me a sense of hope.
I love that. And I also love, like, first of all, embrace the cultural, uniqueness of the region and negotiation. Okay, there is a patience in the negotiation that you will not easily find in the United States, for example, because our cultural tolerance for uncertainty is much smaller than it is in those parts of the world, right? And so some of our like discomfort is that we want this to be, get it done. You know, we want the answers, we want to solve now, we want to move on, and we want the next thing, right? And there it's more like, you know what? It'll happen, right? If we don't get what we want now, we'll wait, right? And I think that the outcome, which I think that we should be hopeful for, is not that if, you know, let's just say the Palestinians wait for another 100 years, because there is in 100 years a demographic shift that could potentially impact the narrative. And I think that that's a really important piece of the conversation. That the waiting, that I think the confidence is that the values that are the facts on the table, it's like the article that we read, that everyone deserves a home, and the Jews need a home in the world, and the Palestinians need a home, and the Jews aren't going there anywhere, and neither are the Palestinians. That's a kind of like, you know, thing that we have to get adjusted to, that time gives us some confidence to know you know, that's where we have to work towards. Candy, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, I think part of this conversation, and certainly this last part, is there are actions that we can take when we're so stuck with what are the solutions? What are the solutions? We may not have a global solution, but we can start with a baby step and something that's consistent, even if it's the small steps of learning Hebrew, or even the small steps of finding an organization. We can actually do something that doesn't make us feel so impotent and angry and frustrated. And we show that consistency to somebody else and your values to someone else in the process, including your children.
Yeah, great. Right? I mean, I think uncertainty and inconsistency, and also like being comfortable with those things, and learning that there's something to navigate, that when there are things that are unclear, that doesn't mean you have to. And I think it's sort of a you know, it's a characterological challenge, because some people just are very uncomfortable with the sort of, you know, lack of clarity in their lives, and become, you know, sometimes people become very uncomfortable with a lack of clarity. But the fact that this one is so yet clear means that you have to find other people that are also feeling the lack of clarity, and you make friends, right? Like the Mr. Rogers story, right? When you learn look for the helpers, look for the people who are trying to figure it out, and be aligned with them, right? Any other comments?
My question
Yeah.
is, what is going on like now?
Right, yeah. Thank you for reminding me.
This new
So,
government.
no, I'm no expert, but I will tell you this, right? Right now, there's a political charge to really push some of the ultra-religious, very conservative, hard-line conservative political points of view. And because there is a coalition forming in which those voices might be heard, and there might even be some kind of persuasion towards them. I just read this morning, you know, there was there's a push to say that like electricity needs to be turned off on Shabbat.
I saw that.
Right? And like the prime minister is like, no, right? Like that's not going to happen. So there are limits to this. The question is, you know, where are those limits going to expand and contract, which I think is true whether the government is progressive or conservative. And I think a lot of us feel a lot of concern that some of those like limits are going to become very narrow, like limiting the rights of LGBTQ, and, you know, the pluralistic expressions of Jewish identity, and, you know, just all kinds of like, you know, immigrants and all kinds of things that are happening. But as we've discussed before, it's almost a global phenomenon of this kind of like turn towards a more, if you will, nationalistic, conservative, limiting kind of attitude. Part of it is pandemic related, part of it is economically motivated, part of it is just sort of the ubiquity of diversity that's happening, and you have a lot of, for lack of a better word, fear. And when people are fearful, just think about yourself. When you are afraid, what do? You regress. You go back into what you are considered to be safe, okay? Anybody who, especially in Judaism and as a rabbi who understands the tradition, my interpretation of the thing that is considered safe is already interpreted to say there's plenty of room for a more expansive understanding here. That's why there's tension. It's not like we all agree that safe space is this, and we all have to go back to that to be safe, right? It's okay for us to have an understanding, a tolerance of settlement activity on both sides that feels wrong and also may be justified. There is tolerance for that, but we have to be able to empower the voices that will be willing to speak with that kind of tolerance. So right now, the scary thing is that the voices that are speaking are intolerant voices. Plain and simple. And that is dangerous. And anytime that you have intolerant voices, you create problems, right? Because somebody gets objectified, marginalized, minimized, dehumanized. And when that happens, we Jews know too well what happens when that happens. So I don't think I answered, but I'll just say, like, I think we're watching. I think we need to pay attention. I think we learned about all of the organizations that say Israel has a right to govern itself. These people were elected by free and open elections, and this was their decision. So they're going to have to contend with the consequences, which will either support it or will result in a re-election of some point. Yeah. That's the great thing about Israel elections. Look at the past 5 years. There's been 4 national elections. I mean, what's that about, right? That's because they're not satisfied with the way that the leadership that's been formed is going to move the country forward. Yeah. So it is. Okay. I will send information very soon. I'm gonna, now that we're in formation, put it on your calendars. January 10th, 11 a.m., 21st century ritual, and more information to come. Happy holidays to everyone. Blessings for a very healthy conclusion of the 2022 year. May 2023 be just completely abound with health and with prosperity and with deeper learning and greater connections, and for us, deeper friendships and more joy.
Amen.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you very much.